Presentations are something that every day as vets we use for teaching, we use them for communication of scientific research, and we use it to get other people on the journey with us when we're trying to look at new ways of getting cultural change and to ensure that we get people with us on that journey. Unfortunately, taking our presentations from face-to-face and transporting those to online and virtual events isn't as simple as just taking our presentations and putting those straight onto a screen share and hoping that we'll maintain that same level of interaction. My name is Toby Trimble. I'm a European specialist in veterinary anaesthesia and analgesia, and I'm also the managing director of Trimble Productions. Over the past 2 years, we've made more than 300 lessons with the world's top CPD companies, vet schools, and veterinary specialists. It's our mission to make education for hundreds of thousands of veterinary professionals more engaging, more effective, and more immersive, using video, storytelling, and cutting-edge educational theory. Tonight, my guest is Andrea Piccini. Andrea is the UK Director of Ideas on Stage. With his team, he's worked with clients such as Microsoft, the World Bank, and Lacoste, and he's helped more than 500 people improve the way that they deliver their presentations for TEDx talks. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Toby. Great to be here.
So, thank you everybody for joining us. I do appreciate it. If you're there, please do drop me a hello in the chat. It'd be nice to see you. We have got a few different things we're going to be talking to you about tonight. So, we can see your chat. We've got it right in front of us. We've got a few different things we're going to cover. So, what we'll be doing is we've got 3 key things we'll be talking about. Firstly, we're going to talk about the differences between in-person and online presentations. We'll also be talking about a practical example of how you yourself can improve your presentations virtually. And then finally, we'll be looking at the top mistakes that presenters and academics make when they're presenting in person, online, and most importantly, how you can avoid those. At the end of the session, we'll be running a Q&A, so please do drop your questions down in the chat, down into the Q&A, and we're very happy to come to those later on. So let's get started.
Let's do this.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks again.
So what are the differences between in-person and online presentations? What's the challenges we've got there?
There are 3 key differences. The first one is around the setup, the technology. Because if you think about things like microphone, webcam, lighting, I don't want to talk about these in too much detail because I know that you are going to give us a demonstration later.
We've got a little bit of something coming up for you, so stick around.
But you see, the setup, the technology, doesn't make a big difference in an in-person presentation or lecture, but it does make a big difference online. So that's one thing. The other big difference is around the need to interact with the audience, even more online. Now, audience interaction is always important, but there is a key difference because in a face-to-face presentation or lecture, we need to know that after about 10 minutes, the audience's attention goes down.
So in person, so it's 10 minutes, and then they become they become tired or they become less interested.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how strong your message is, how interesting your subject is. It doesn't matter how good you are as a communicator. The audience's attention will go down after about 10 minutes, which means that after 10 minutes, as a communicator, you need to start panicking because it's as if you need to buy the audience's attention back. You need to do something that engages the audience. It could be as simple as asking a question, inviting them to think about what you've told them and speak to the person next to them. It could be creating an environment where they can work on some exercises. There are many possibilities, but we want to do that kind of interaction. Online, because there are many other distractions, it's much harder to gain the audience's attention and to keep it high. So the 10-minute rule becomes the 3-minute rule, which means that online, every 3 to 5 minutes, we need to find a way to interact with the audience. So that's another key difference. And it would be interesting to know from people in the audience today, do you ever find it hard to interact with the audience, to engage the audience in an online environment? If that's the case, if you find it harder online versus a face-to-face presentation or lecture, please let us know in the chat either yes or no. And then as they do, there is another key difference, which is around our delivery skills. And let's see, so for example, Gwen says much harder online. Yes, also Michaela as well. Yeah, online is much harder. Mark, so you see, it is true and it is much harder, but it's still possible to create that kind of engagement with the audience. Now, the other difference is from a delivery perspective. Now, I'll give you a couple of practical examples. If you think about eye contact. Now, we want to make good eye contact with the audience. Why? Because we want to make a good connection with them. Now, we're having this conversation. I'm talking to you. You're talking to me. If we were having this conversation and I wouldn't be looking at you, what would be the experience for you?
I mean, I probably would be thinking that you were not interested in what I had to say, or you were distracted.
Exactly. And the same happens when we give a presentation to an audience, when we give a lecture. Now, the same principle applies. We want to make good eye contact with the audience. The way we do it is different. Face to face, we want to have a person-to-person interaction. So one person, one sentence. Another person, another sentence. Another person, another sentence. That's how we do good eye contact.
Yeah.
That's how we make good eye contact.
You sort of sweep through the audience, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. It has to be a person-to-person interaction. Online, what do we need to do? Well, the audience is there today.
Yeah, we're talking to you. So I'm talking to you, Marisa Ginazzi. I'm talking to you, Aoife. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Sue. Yep.
Yeah. So if we are communicating online like we're doing today, then instead of looking at the screen or looking at our slides, depending on what the context is for us, we need to remember that the audience is there. So we need to look at the lens of the camera, and that's how we make a strong connection. I can give you another practical example, and then I can stop with the key differences.
Yeah.
Which is around body language. Now, if you think about hand gestures, for example, hand gestures are very effective. If you want to be, the more you move your hands when speaking in public, the more dynamic you will be perceived as a presenter, which is a good thing. Now, there is one thing, though, that we need to consider when moving our hands online that we don't have to consider face-to-face. Any ideas by any chance? You, Toby, or anybody in the chat? Any ideas that come to mind?
I suppose, you can't really move around very much. You can't really move around, so you can't walk around, because I walk around if I present in person.
Exactly, and that's why it becomes even more important to use your hands, because that becomes the main element of your body language. Now, Lucy says you can't see them on the screen. Exactly.
Yeah,
Lucy is right.
And Mark's got it as well. Yep.
Mark as well. Yeah, absolutely. So that's why what we need to do is online, say for example that you are delivering a web class or a webinar, you are on Zoom maybe, or whatever the tool is, we need to keep our hands a little bit higher than we would normally do in a face-to-face presentation.
So we're talking like more T-Rex than downward dog. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we're essentially if you look like a T-Rex, you're fine.
Well, as long as you do it in a natural way. Now, if I were to keep my hands here in a face-to-face presentation, it would be weird.
Yeah.
But when you do it online, as long as you do it in a natural way, the idea is, as they said, the audience can't see them, so we need to make sure that our body, our hands in particular, are visible. So they need to be within the view of the camera. So to summarize, 3 key differences. One is around the technology, the setup. Another one is around the level at which we interact with the audience. We need to do it more online. And then the third difference is around the way we deliver a message. We talked about eye contact and hand gestures, just to give you a couple of examples.
It's really interesting, and I'm just keeping an eye on the chat here. So Claire Hodgson just said that eye contact is a neurotypical need. And it's interesting when we look at communication and we look at learning. If you break it right back down to the neuroscience and the neurohormonal cascades, you're right. You're bang on, Claire. Actually, is that those things are extremely important. So, yeah, good chat.
And I like that comment because there's neuroscience here. I believe and I know that an effective presentation, an effective communication is a mix of art and science.
Absolutely.
It's not just art, it's also science.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we go right down into the depths of what storytelling is, and we delve into this on our workshops, but really, if you look at storytelling and teaching, they're actually both very similar things, but we reserve teaching for something that we do for education, universities, schools, and it's seen as something which is often quite just perfunctory or something we have to do. But and then storytelling is actually done for creative people, for those people who are very skilled at what they do. They're directors, they're book writers, they're people who make audiobooks or podcasts. But actually, both of them use words, pictures, and sounds to conjure an image in somebody else's mind. And actually, they're really similar. It's just that one is seen as a mark of something we really enjoy doing, is very, very skilled and arty, and the other one is much more educational. But if we bring them both together, actually, that could be really that's a really a very, very powerful way we can educate.
Powerful combination. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I'm going to I'll leave you with Andrea for a couple of minutes because I'm going to go and get something ready. I'll see you in a second.
Yeah. And as Toby gets ready for a quick demonstration. Now, if you think about it, so far we already talked about a couple of practical techniques, eye contact, hand gestures. Now, keep this in mind. In communication, there is a paradox often, which is the comfort paradox, which means that if you find it uncomfortable to practice certain techniques, like, for example, looking at the lens of the camera, remember that what's comfortable for you as the presenter is often not comfortable for the audience, and vice versa. What's not comfortable for you is comfortable for the audience. So keep it in mind. And I think that now Toby is ready to is dialing in from remotely, right? Is that the plan?
Yep.
Hello? Andrea?
Toby, guys, what's going on? I can't hear you, Toby.
Wi-Fi. Bad.
Oh. Guys, what's going on? I can't hear you, Toby.
Oh, sorry. Yep, sorry. The Wi-Fi signal's bad. Yeah, sorry. It's not very good here. Can you see me? Okay.
Now I can.
Okay. Yeah. Can you ask everyone in the chat if they can see me and if they think it looks good? I'm about to start I've got my my hour-long presentation on stats.
So in the chat, I don't know, Mark. Yeah, Mark, and also the others. Can you confirm? Can you see Toby at the moment? Let us know in the chat. In the meantime, I can tell you, Toby, that I can see you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, so I'm about to start my my presentation here. So I'm just dialing in remotely. We are going to show you how we can improve our presentations. So what we've done is we have set up ourselves in here. So first thing we can do is, hopefully you can see my face. So I'm back here at the moment. We've mocked up what we hope is going to illustrate how to do a great presentation when you're doing that remotely. So let's look through a few different concepts. It's really important that when you're communicating, that you can do that in a way which makes it so that the technology does not get in the way of your key message. So let's find a way of doing that and showing you practically how we can do it. So I'm currently in our storeroom, and I'm going to talk you through how this is done. So one of the first things that you can do actually is to look at the camera position you've got. So your camera position at the moment, you can just kind of see right up my nose. Actually, my eyes are cut off here. And as we talked about earlier, this neurotypical need to have good eye contact. One of the best things we can do actually is just take our laptop or our computer and just raise that up, and then that can be a little bit higher. And now I've got my eyes just across the top third of the screen. Okay, so Andrea, does that look better for you?
It's much better, and the main reason why that's the case, Toby, is because before you were looking down to the camera, and that, from a communication perspective, feels aggressive. So you're right, the best angle for the camera to capture your face is at the same level as your eyes.
Absolutely. Okay. So now we've got the camera position set up. Let's look at the lighting here. Okay, so what we've got actually is we've got a huge harsh light here. So we've set this up where we've got a really bright window. And when you have that, what happens is you get a great big hot spot on you, or you might actually be in silhouette. And that's just something which many of you will appreciate, and you will have seen on many presentations or video calls. But it's really distracting, and it gets in the way of your message for your viewers. So what can we do? So firstly, well, let's just turn that light off. Okay, so now it's much darker. Okay, so we need to have some sort of light source. So let's get a lamp like this. Okay, so we'll turn this on. This is a simple desk lamp. It's a Lumi desk lamp. It's just a daylight lamp. But all we need to do is to have that in front of us, and that's going to give us a little bit more light. It just gives a little bit more and makes the light you have a bit more balanced exposure. We also could turn it around and we could reflect it off the wall, and that gives you a really good diffusion. That gives you a great look there. So Andrea, for you, how is that looking? Is that starting to look a bit better?
It is definitely a bit better. You still look a little bit like a ghost, but apart from that, it's much better than before.
Okay, all right. So now, so I suppose what we can look at now is we've got some light, and we can make that a little bit better. But let's look at the background here. So the background we've got here is our storeroom. It's quite busy. It's quite distracting. So what we have is something that for your viewers, they might actually be looking at that. They might go, "Oh, look, they've got some boxes in the background. What's the text on there?" And that just means that for them, that they won't be concentrating on you and what the important messages you have to explain to them, and they'll be more concentrating on your background. So having something that's really busy or lots of different colors can often be fairly distracting. Okay, so Andrea, tell me more about backgrounds.
Yeah, the key word you used, Toby, is distracting. So when it comes to background, the main thing we need to consider is now if you can organize and create a professional background, great, but you don't have to. If you can't do that, the main thing is that whatever you've got in the background does not have to be distracting, because when you are communicating, when you are presenting something, you are the presentation, not your background. So anytime you've got too much mess behind you, that gets in the way of your ability to get your message across.
Okay, so now we've moved around and we've got a more neutral background. So this is just the background of our podcast studio. So we've got kind of fairly neutral background. We've got our logo here, but that's just a nice to have. But really, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to improve the image we've got. So this really neutral background. And one of the things we can do is you can actually get a light which is a different color than you might have. You might have seen you can get them on Amazon, fairly cheaply. You could have a blue one, you could have a green one, just something that kind of adds a little bit of a soft light to the background. So let's put on some lights here. So now we've got this really warm tungsten orange glow coming up, and it just generally makes it look a little bit nicer, a little bit warmer there. We can also kind of put something into the background which gives a little bit of interest but won't be distracting. So this could be something like some books, particularly if you're an author or you've got some particular papers that you want to feature in the background. These things are nice to give context to who you are. So for me, I'm going to put a plant in the background because we've got some nice plants here, and it's good to be able to kind of put those in. And you see there that we've got something which is going to give us a little bit of a soft touch, a little bit of a background, but it's not necessarily too distracting. The last thing we're going to talk about, and hopefully you've noticed the difference between what I'm doing now and way of how you can hear Andrea in the studio, is that the audio isn't great. So if my audio is up here and I've got the audio coming from my laptop, it sounds significantly better. But if I go right back here, and actually, like we spoke about earlier, if we want to have our whole body, our whole upper body in frame and be able to see gestures, what that can do is it can mean that we actually don't get great audio because the microphone is all the way in there. It's the length of my arm away. So what we can do is we can bring in an external microphone. So this is the microphone that I use. This is a Blue Yeti. It's less than £100. It's not hugely expensive. And we can plug it into the laptop. And now what you hear when you listen to the Blue Yeti is actually you hear that the audio is warmer. It's probably louder. And you've got something which shouldn't be as harsh for your listeners. when you've got harsh audio, sometimes that can be very wearing for the people listening, and even more wearing than poor images. If you imagine an example here, so let me know in the chat. So if you have listened to one of your favorite podcasts and the host's already got fairly good audio, but then you listen to a guest speaker who perhaps is calling in on a phone call, or they've got very poor audio, for me, I find that it can be very wearing. And as much as I would like to listen to them, I actually find it really tiring, and sometimes I need to switch it off. And that's the same if we've got poor audio when we're presenting. So really, in summary, the idea here is to have a simple and inexpensive setup that can allow you to present, but doesn't get in the way of your key message. And with that, let's go back to Andrea.
I never understand why they call it a Blue Yeti and the microphone is not blue. But apart from that, the key takeaway for us is that you can massively improve your setup from a technological perspective without breaking the bank. Amazing demonstration, Toby. And I think I was saying that's the key takeaway, right? It is possible for everybody to massively improve the setup, looking at things like microphone, webcam, lighting, without spending too much money. Of course, we can do a lot depending on what our investment power is.
Yeah.
But it can be done in for a very low budget as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not always about having a huge setup. It's very often just about following some basic principles to make sure that people can see you, they can hear you, and you having the camera just on the level of your eye line is enormously beneficial. It's really helpful. The worst possible when I did a Zoom lecture with a chap last year, and his screen was here and his camera was there, and it was just like, so if we cut to camera 2, he was like, "Yes, Toby, absolutely. Yep, okay, I can see what you're saying. Yep, very good." And the whole time he did this for me for like 2.5 hours, and I was like, I want to say, "Can you just look at me, please? Please look at me."
There was no connection whatsoever being made with the audience. You were the audience in that particular occasion. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked about the differences between in-person and online presentations. We've also talked about a practical example, and now we're going to go into those key mistakes that presenters and academics make when presenting and how we can avoid them. Before we go into that, just remember that we've got a Q&A. So if you have got any questions, please do drop those in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to come to those afterwards. So tell me, what's the first key mistake that you know and you've seen over the hundreds of people that you've coached?
Yep. The number one mistake is that often our message is either too complex or too technical, or simply we include too much information. And the reason why that happens, Toby, is because often we know so much about a subject. Think about academics, professors, communicators in general. We know so much about a subject. We are also so close to it that we think that everything is important. Isn't that true? And so we think that we need to communicate everything. But always put yourselves and this is for our listeners today, in your audience's shoes. If everything is important, then for the audience, nothing is important. So that's the big mistake. And for example, now I know you are an assistant professor, right?
Yeah.
Now, and also for our listeners today, I know that I'm pretty sure that many of you are also professors, you give lectures. Now, if you go back to when you were studying instead, as a student, do you remember, did you have maybe a professor who you could see he or she knew everything about their subject, but he or she was not able to simplify the subject for the students? Also for our listeners today, can you please let me know in the chat, yes or no, if you had that experience? A professor who, Sarah, yes, Laura as well.
Yeah,
so you can see Fang as well. A professor who you can see that they know the stuff, they know the subject, but they find it hard to simplify the message, the subject for the students. So absolutely, Mark and Sharon as well. Now,
Yeah,
what's the
Andrea.
problem there? The problem is that problem is the number one issue in communication, which is called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge, which means the curse of knowledge is our inability to imagine what it means not knowing what we know. It's our inability to put ourselves in the audience's shoes. And I can tell you, Toby, it's very, very, very easy to fall into this trap unless you find a way to get access to some sort of a fresh or external perspective.
I think it's a really interesting concept that you talk about, because for me, and when we work with specialists and we're developing courses, typically what we find is that there is something that is grandfathered towards the format that we have is very much that we need to deliver a concept, and therefore we tell them a concept, then we give them some detail, and the idea is that we just give lots of detail, and therefore, because we've given them lots of detail, therefore they get thorough and complete learning. But if you flip that around, if you flip that to the other side, what's it like for the learner? Well, for the learner, they hear concept, detail, 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 detail. And rather than them getting more learning or more in-depth, thorough learning, actually they get overwhelmed, and we actually end up getting less learning because of that. And it's really difficult to get away from it. And I think for me, a lot of it is that that comes from a place where we think that the value we have is through the knowledge we tell people. So I'd quite like to ask the audience. So for you, what, if you are a lecturer, what is the most important thing that you feel that you give to your students? So you're a subject matter expert, you're a specialist, you're an experienced lecturer, or you're a leader in your organization. What's the most important thing that you give to your students?
And as we wait for the comments, now what you said, detail, what that creates is confusion, overwhelming and confusion.
Yeah.
Often we think that what we are communicating, our message, our subject is simple and clear and engaging. The experience from the audience's perspective is the opposite. It's confusing. And in communication, if you confuse, you lose. You lose your audience, you lose their attention. And that's why this is so important.
I like that. Okay, oh, wow, we've got loads of people. Okay, I'm liking this. So we have, what do we get? So we get confidence in the knowledge. Susanna said take her messages. Elena said curiosity. Lewis has said storytelling, life experience is brilliant. Pam has said enthusiasm for the subject. We've got empathy, curiosity. We've got interest in the topic, wanting to learn more, excite their interest, self-education. There's no right or wrong. No, there is no good or bad. These are really interesting insights. No one said knowledge.
And no one said information.
No one said information.
Which I like, I have to say, Toby, because I think that even for academics, I specialize in business presentations, but also like any other kind of presentations you mentioned, TED Talks, also for professors, academics, then it's not just about sharing information. Of course, you want to share information, but often because there is an objective, you want to use your knowledge, your information, because there is an objective that goes beyond just sharing some information.
Yeah. Exactly. And I just think the interesting thing is that we got all of the audience commenting here. Even if you haven't dropped something in the chat, you probably think, actually, yeah, I've got an idea. But we're still tied to this format of lots and lots and lots of knowledge in one go. And, I think we know that, we know the industry, the academics are working absolutely overtime. Student numbers have gone up. We know that in practice, vets have got less and less time to do CPD. So, it's important that the time that people spend in education is well spent. So it might be that, there are different ways to be getting the knowledge across in a more in a more concise way.
Concise. The more you say, the less they remember.
Exactly.
As counterintuitive as this may seem, but that's how it works from a communication perspective. When you give a lecture, when you speak in public, the more you say, the less they remember.
Absolutely.
And that's the number one mistake, the number one problem I see.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So that's key mistake number 1. Okay. And how to avoid it. What's number 2?
The second mistake is this. And before I tell you what the second mistake is, can I ask another question?
Of course you can, yeah.
Right. So let's say, this is a question for everybody here. Let's say that in a couple of weeks, you need to give a presentation. Now, I call it a presentation. It could be a lecture, depending on what your context is. And let's say that today, you start preparing that lecture, that presentation, today. Where would you start? What's the first thing you normally do when you start preparing a presentation or a lecture? Let me know in the chat. And before you type anything, though, don't tell me what you think you should be doing. Don't tell me what you know you should be doing. Tell me what you actually do. What's the first thing you do when you start preparing a presentation or a lecture? So I see Ingrid, overview. Ify, learning outcomes. Sue, pictures. I write the objectives, the key messages. Esther, yeah, write down. Marisa must be Italian, maybe. Yeah, write down the key messages I want to get across. Yeah, the template. Okay, look, this is amazing because nobody told me, I think nobody said, I open up PowerPoint and put together some slides, which, believe it or not, is the very first thing most people do. You have a very experienced audience today. But the very first thing most people do is they just open up PowerPoint and put together some slides. Or maybe, as I've seen it here as well, they start thinking about the messages, the outline, the structure, their objectives, what they want to communicate, which is much, much better than just opening up PowerPoint, but it's not the very first thing we want to do. When we give a presentation, when we give a lecture, we are communicating with someone. And so as somebody said, because I saw it, like Jamie, for example, and Pam as well, we are communicating with someone. And so we need to start with them. It's there with the audience. It's their presentation, no ours. We always need to start with the audience. Think of a presentation, Toby, as a present. If I want to give you a present, it's your present, not mine. And so I need to make sure that I know you so that I can buy something that you like. A presentation is very similar. When you give people a presentation, it's their presentation, not yours. And so you need to make sure that you know your audience, definitely before you open up PowerPoint, but also before you start thinking about your key messages. Your key messages depend on the audience. Now, for academics, for example, maybe you need to give a lecture on a certain subject to graduate students. And maybe the week after, you need to give a similar lecture on the same subject to PhD students. Now, depending on the audience, I'm sure that from a content perspective, that lecture will be very different, right? So this applies not just to TED Talks, to any other kind of presentation as well. I'll give you an example. Some time ago, we were working with a client. Her name is Marie from Paris. Marie is an executive. She's an expert in leadership. And she was invited by an association in Finland to give a talk about leadership. And she was super excited. It was one of the first international speaking opportunities. And so she prepared really well. She knew her message. She prepared 50 beautiful slides. And also, she rehearsed properly. So she was ready to go. She flew to Finland the day before the conference, then arrived there on the day, half an hour before the audience, because she wanted to make sure that she had time to set things up. And when she was about to connect her laptop to the screen, she realized that there was no screen. So a little bit of panic. She went and asked the organizers, assuming And they would say, oh, sorry, Marie, now we're going to find a screen for you. But actually, what they did was they started laughing. They started laughing. And so she says, why are you laughing? And they say, look, Marie, you want to show 50 slides, but actually, you've been invited to give a talk to the association in Finland of blind people. Blind people. Now, Toby, I know it's an extreme example, but it happened for real. You see, Marie was very well prepared, apart from one thing. She didn't know her audience. She didn't even take the time to translate the name of the association from Finnish to French, and she would have realized that perhaps there was no need to have 50 beautiful slides. So for everybody here, that's the very first thing you want to do. Forget about PowerPoint. Forget also about your messages. Start with the audience and their needs.
I think that's really important, because if we look at what we're doing from a perspective with veterinary speakers, we're looking at knowing the context of the audience. So we know that we would have a different approach to students if they're in their first year of vet school compared to how we would treat them if they're in year 4 and about to go into clinical rotations. And that might be different to how we present when we're talking to PhD students or presenting at a conference. We're presenting at the Association of Veterinary Anaesthetists. So that's going to be a very different conversation we have. So I think it's important to be looking at what we can do to really look at the audience first. I mean, clearly, from the answers we've got a bunch of people here tonight who are very passionate about presentations and have done some training and actually understand what they're doing for structuring the presentations. That's absolutely fantastic.
Yep, great to see.
So, number 3, what's the third key mistake that presenters make?
The third mistake is around what we do when we want to visualize or illustrate our message. Now, we don't have to use PowerPoint all the time. We don't even have to use slides all the time. There are other approaches as well. It could be video. We could amplify a message with video. It could be a simple flip chart or a whiteboard. But a lot of people use PowerPoint. We use slides, which is not wrong per se, but the mistake there is the way we use it. And I often see the typical death by PowerPoint, where you've got slide after slide after slide with lots of details, bullet points, too much text. The problem with that is that people can't read and listen at the same time. This is demonstrated by research. If you look at how our brain works, the written text on a slide or even on video is processed in exactly the same part of the brain that processes the spoken text. So what that means is that for a brain, reading and listening are two conflicting activities. We can't do both things at the same time.
So what we're saying is that if we are presenting the viewer or the learner with something which is visual, which is going to be on the screen, so we've got lots and lots of text, or we've got something which is an image, a chart, a graph that they've got to interpret, and you keep talking, one of those will happen, not both.
Exactly. And in terms of the audience's retention, like how much they remember after the lecture or after the presentation. And I've got a question for our listeners today. And I've learned this from Dr. John Medina. He's the author of Brain Rules, fascinating book. It's a book that tells us what science tells us about what works and what doesn't work in many areas of our life. And I was mainly interested in the communication side of things. And what I've learned is that, say for example, that you give a lecture and you follow the typical text-based approach. You've got slides with lots of text. Now, if you think about, and this is a question to everybody, if you think about your audience's retention, how much they remember from your lecture, from your presentation, 3 days after your presentation. If you follow a text-based approach, lots of text on your slides, what do you think? From 0% to 100%. How much do they remember? Please let us know in the chat. So we've got 10% of less, 10, 20, 5, 10. Sarah says less than 5. Very pessimistic, Sarah, but it's true.
Rose is 10 to 15%.
3%. Yeah,
Leanne, 3%. Yeah.
Yeah, so everybody gets the point.
Suzanne thinks 30%. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue said, I was told, but I forgot. And so I'll tell so I'll tell
Thanks,
you,
Sue.
Sue.
Brilliant. That's fantastic.
I'll tell you, Sue. It is 10%. Just 10%. Now think about your objective, what you're trying to do with your communication. You will, whatever it is, you will never be able to achieve your goal if they only remember 10% of what you told them. However, if you present exactly the same information, so you don't change the message, the subject, the way you communicate remains, the message remains the same, but you support your message visually. As you said, it could be an image, it could be a graph, it could be an icon. Now, what's the new percentage? If we follow a more visual approach, what do you think? Let us know in the chat. We go from 10 to, what's the new? 50, 30, 40, Laura,
30,
70. Okay, that's very optimistic, I have to say.
Marisa, 60%. Esther, 25.
Yeah. But I have to say, yes, Suzanne, 25. Now, some of the answers are very close. The answer is 65%.
65%.
65%. Massive difference. And that has nothing to do with your message. It has all to do with the way you illustrate your message, the way you reinforce and support. So the key takeaway for everybody here is that every time we use something to support a message, it could be PowerPoint, it could be a video, it could be a whiteboard, a flip chart, we need to do it to support, reinforce, and amplify a message, never to replicate what we are saying with lots of text, because again, people can't read and listen at the same time. I'll give an analogy, Toby. If you think about restaurants, if you go to a restaurant, what good restaurants do is they pay a lot of attention to the food. The food has to be a great quality, but they also pay a lot of attention to the way the food is presented, right? Even the most delicious dish must be properly plated, and presentation of the food affects the taste. That's a fact.
It's all contextual, isn't it?
Yeah. In a presentation, every time we communicate an idea, it's the same thing. Your food is your message. And of course, you need to make sure there has to be great quality. But you also need to pay attention to the way you present your food from a visual perspective.
It's just really interesting to kind of think about the different aspects that really make a huge difference with your presentation, because you actually start to say that you take your presentation, which is mostly words, and then you use images, you use video, you use good illustration, something like that, and actually how different that could make the retention. 65% is enormously different. It's not. You'd think if you were doing really well, you'd be really pleased if you doubled the retention, wouldn't you? But that's more than 6 times as impressive.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Okay, so we're going to go into our Q&A in a second. So if you have any questions for us, please do drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to come to those. Before we do that, one thing I'd like to offer you is that it's very interesting and it's very easy to come along to an event like this to become inspired and think that was something that was really interesting, and then actually to do nothing with it. It's a typical thing that we find lots of people tend to do. But if you want to learn about these concepts and to implement them in your practice or your organization, I'd be happy to extend an invitation to you to do a one-to-one strategy call. We do those with people, and we look at your needs and we look at if we can help you. And if you sound like the sort of person that would be keen to implement some of these strategies yourself, all you need to do is to drop call into the chat. So just drop the word call into the chat now, and we'll reach out, and we're very happy to have a chat with you. So let's talk about the Q&A section. Okay, I'll bring the Q&A up. So So Q&A. So the first question we have is the question we have is for someone who wants to get immediate benefit out of what they're doing. What's the first thing they can do to really improve what they're doing? What's the one thing, if they can do one thing, what are they going to do that's going to make a difference?
Practice, just do it. You see, Toby, any skill that requires knowledge and technique, like speaking in public, presenting, communicating, like learning how to play an instrument, learning how to play football, you need knowledge and technique.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got this combination, knowledge and technique, what really makes a difference is practice. So what can they do? Just do it, give it a try. Give it a try though by being aware of some of the things we've talked about today. Try to give it a try, put those skills into practice, and then what you'll find is that the more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
Okay. So really, and I know before I started to work with you, there are different types of people preparing. So there are people who are the preparers and the practicers, and those people who are the improvisers. I used to be the improviser, so I was very happy to jump on a presentation, jump on a call, and just wing it. And I know my subject area very well. You know, like we all do. If you're very specialized, you know the area extremely well. But often, I was never nearly as good as I could have been.
Being an improviser is not wrong. You're right. There are two types of speakers: the improvisers, a cue, and the memorizers. The memorizers like to have a script. The improvisers like to have more freedom. And it's a spectrum, by the way. So I would be interested. Let us know in the chat, where are you in this spectrum? It's not that maybe you are 100% a memorizer or 100% an improviser. Where are you? Maybe you are more towards the improvisers. Maybe you are more towards the memorizers. And as we look, so we've got lots of everybody is an improviser. It looks like, 50-50, 75% memorizer, Okay, there are some memorizers as well. Now, here is the thing. It doesn't really matter. First of all, there is no right or wrong approach. There's only the approach that works for you. But I can tell you that it doesn't really matter whether you are an improviser or a memorizer, and especially for improvisers. Listen to me, improvisers. It doesn't really matter if every time you rehearse, because I would always encourage everybody to rehearse a number of times in preparation for a presentation, an interview, a lecture. And for improvisers, it doesn't matter if every time you rehearse, you say different things, you use different language, different words, different sentences. That's fine because you are improvising. But I can promise you that whatever you say would be much more powerful and impactful the fifth time than the first. So we haven't talked about it, but that would be another mistake. Not rehearsing, not preparing, not verbalizing out loud absolutely. Is another key mistake I see all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can see lots of comments going along in the going along in the chat as well. We've got loads of questions, Andrea. We've got 12 questions that have come in, and we'll come to as many as we possibly can. But thank you very much for submitting. It's great to see the engagement. So Aoife has asked. She has said, "What is your opinion on online polling to assess the engagement of your audience?"
Yeah, and I'll try to go as quick as possible with my answers so that we can cover as many of them.
Absolutely.
I like it as a technique. Why not? It could be the best thing you can do is to vary things. So within the same presentation, sometimes you can launch a poll, sometimes you can invite interaction in the chat. If you have a small group, you can also do interaction on audio, having a chat, a conversation with people. It doesn't matter what you do, but you can vary things. And the most important thing is that you want your audience to do something.
Yeah.
Which could be answering a poll.
You just want them, you almost want them to kind of get out of that passive state that they're in and then engage with something to make their brain not kind of go into like screensaver mode, not to go into low power mode.
I like the analogy.
You know?
Exactly. So every time the audience does something, like answering a poll, typing something in the chat, it means that they are there with you. They are listening to you. They are paying attention to what you're saying, to your message, and they're not doing something else. So yeah, good approach.
So there's a tricky one here, and I'll be interesting to see. So from Michaela has asked, how do you balance things when you're presenting and performing a hybrid presentation? So she says that she finds it's the hardest to balance.
It is true. It's hard. Now, this is in a way what we are doing today is kind of a hybrid situation. It definitely is, because we are in person, you and I, and then we've got an online audience. The most important thing there is preparation before the event. So instead of just going there trying to wing it, it's not going to work. You need to be prepared from a content perspective, from a setup technological perspective. And also there are, when you've got a hybrid environment, a hybrid dynamic, there are little things like, for example, I don't want to take us as an example, but if you think about today's dynamic, so we started with us together and then you went to another room. Now, what happened in those 10 seconds when you went to the other room? Well, we had to think about it.
Yeah, we did. We had to work out what we were going to do, didn't we?
Yeah. Then you came back from the other room, you came back here. And then we thought, okay, what are we going to do in those 10 seconds? But it's something that we planned. Of course, we haven't planned exactly what we were going to say, but we thought about the whole process.
We gave Andrea the task of waffling. He's very good at waffling.
But you see, I knew that I had to say something because that was the organization of the event. If I didn't know it, if that preparation didn't happen in advance, then it would have been an issue. So preparation is the key thing.
Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. So, okay, so there's one here that I could answer. So Laura has asked, do you have a preference for a laptop camera or a standalone camera? That's interesting. That'd be a question for our head of production, Gareth, to answer. He looks after all of our cameras and our equipment. To be honest, I don't think it matters. The most important thing probably is your lighting than anything else. The lighting will dictate much how good the camera is. You can have cameras that are really, that are laptop cameras. You could have an SLR camera that's mid-range, or you could have a cinema camera that costs tens of £1,000s. If your lighting's terrible, it will all look terrible. So actually, for doing a presentation where you're online, firstly, for me, I probably would get a light and a microphone. Those are the first things that would make a biggest difference, because that's going to mean that your camera isn't going to struggle so much. And especially one of the examples we used earlier of having a really big light source, when we had that big window with the light there, the problem with the camera is it's trying to work out, I've got a really bright source, really bright light here, and a really dark thing here. So what am I going to do? And it tries to pick one. And that's why one often looks really blown out and really bright, and one looks very dark. Or you see the thing where you see someone going light, dark, and you don't quite know if they're coming or going. So I don't think it matters what camera you use. I think it's mostly about getting your lighting, your camera position, and those small things probably get you, much closer than it does having, all the kit in the world.
And you said, Toby, lighting and microphone as well. I agree with that 100%. Microphone, which helps your voice. Now, voice, for obvious reasons, is a very powerful communication tool. Online, it is definitely one of the most important tools we have. And that's why a microphone makes a huge difference when it comes to online communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've also had another question, which Lewis has asked. So Lewis has said, have we got any comments on online mini lectures, which are, 15, maybe up to 20 minutes with breaks in between, instead of long traditional lectures that are, say, an hour long? I've got quite strong opinions on these.
Go ahead.
So I think if you look at what a lecture is, the lecture of 1 hour, if you're doing that online, if you're there like you all are at the moment, you're being kind enough to give us your time and to watch it, but you've got so much, you've turned up and you're doing it live, so it may well work. So some ways that works well if you're giving up your time for it. If you're doing a live event, that's probably the appropriate time to do it. If you're in person, yeah, it's a time to do it. However, when you're pre-recording something and they're going to watch it later, having a break and having it in smaller chunks, it makes sense because it's less taxing for you. You can take a break and come back when you're fresh and watch it. But it also means that if you're asking someone to watch something that's pre-recorded, it's an hour long, as much as I would love to think that, that some people who couldn't come along tonight would like to watch it, I don't think they'll watch the whole thing. By all means, if you're watching this now and it's pre-recorded, drop me an email and say, "Hey, I watched it. I'd love to see how many emails I got. I better get one email." But ultimately, I think that if it's shorter, actually, that's really good. Doesn't mean you need to cut down your overall content or simplify it. Just means you need to kind of break it up, and that can work really powerfully.
And it also forces you in a way. Yes, you can break it up, but also it forces you to think about, okay, I've got, for this particular topic or section of my subject, I've got 20 minutes instead of an hour. What's the minimum dose that I can communicate from a content perspective?
That's interesting because when we in medicine, we talk about the minimum effective dose.
There you go.
We talk about that for antibiotics, or we talk about that for some of the drugs we use in anesthesia. So yes, it's the minimum. There you go. The minimum effective dose for your particular subject to develop understanding, and therefore they can get a grip of that, and then you can build upon that in the next step. And that's a really powerful. That's how we build our courses. So, okay. So Laura has asked, what do we think of the tools that allow you to create animated videos like someone is drawing at the presentation as the presentation builds? So it's probably those presentations where it's kind of, are you thinking kind of the sort of the presentations where you see someone's hands drawing, Laura? Is that what you're thinking about?
I think so. I'll take that as I've got some ideas. Feel free to step in as well, Toby, from a technical perspective. Now, when it comes to, I think that could be a good approach, but here is the key thing. When it comes to animations in general, anything that's animated, what I think is that the first priority for a communicator should be to animate the audience, not a visual support, not a slide, for example. It doesn't mean that animations don't work, they're not effective. They can be very powerful as long as anything we do from an animation perspective is there to support and reinforce a message. If that's the case, then they can work really well, including the drawing dynamic that we see here in the question from Laura. But let's always ask ourselves, is that thing, that slide, that video, that animation, is that really reinforcing a message? If the answer is yes, fantastic. Let's go ahead and use it. If not, we may want to rethink the approach.
The other thing about it is, we touched on it earlier about eye contact. So having someone on screen, and by that I don't mean just in a small box at the end of the edge of the screen, is that having somebody on screen is actually important for the way that your brain will keep engaged. If you don't have it, your brain will switch into a non-engaged mode and will kind of start to reduce the amount of engagement you've got with it, and therefore you'll start to go into this screensaver, this kind of low power mode. So I think it can work, but you probably have to truly intersperse it with some person on the screen, because that's going to keep you engaged.
Yep.
Okay. So we have, from Mark has asked, how would you recommend reducing text when you're speaking on specific technical or academic subjects? Some of them are simply text-heavy equations or training in a very scientific points that need to be written down. Would love to get this adapted. Very keen. Interesting. Yeah.
So here is the thing. Don't get me wrong, Mark. I'm not saying that you should never give your audience all the information and all the details they need if they do need the information. All I'm saying is that they shouldn't be included on your slides. Now, if you have an equation and you need to write it on a whiteboard, then go ahead and use the equation. But in general, like scientific presentations, technical presentations, then the best thing people can do is this. Great presenters separate things, and they understand that slides and document or handouts or workbooks are two different things, and they should be separated. So what we need to do is we always need to keep our visual support, slides, if we use slides, simple and visual. One idea per slide, maybe an image, a couple of words. Let's keep it simple and visual. And then if the audience needs to have more details, Mark, what you can do is you can create a handout, a document, a workbook, and that document includes all the details they need. Now, to use an analogy, you will never use your toothbrush to comb your hair, and maybe that's a bad example if you look at me, but you will never use your toothbrush to comb your hair just because it has bristles like your hairbrush. A toothbrush and a hairbrush are two different things, and we use them for two different activities. Slide and documents with more details are two different things, and from a communication perspective, we should use them for two different activities.
So my take on this, and it also comes from what Sue Page has asked about. She's asked, how do we pick images and how to select those? How do we select images to make them impactful, not distracting? Okay, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because Mark's question was about technical or academic subjects or equations. So what you can do is you can introduce the concept of your equation, and then you can build it up graphically, so you can go through it slowly, let people understand a little bit, and then you can add on the next bit, and finally you can add on the next bit. So you build it up slowly and take the audience on that journey with you, because for me, it depends on what your audience is. I'm an anaesthetist, but I'm not particularly big on maths. I haven't really got the maths brain. I often teach maths because I'm not great at it, so I kind of understand how people feel about it. But for me, what I would do is I would try to make it in a way that you can relate it to something. So, for example, when we talk about cardiac output, we could say, oh, that's kind of that stroke volume times heart rate. We've got end diastolic volume minus end systolic volume and all of these things. But actually, what we can essentially say is that the faster the heart beats and the more the heart is filled, the better the cardiac output, the amount of blood it ejects is. And that's a gross simplification, but the audience gets a little bit of it, and then you can build upon that. So it's often about finding the right analogy or the right story to validate what you're saying. Does that make sense?
And on that point, also for Mark, a recommendation for you, if you are interested in technical and scientific presentations, a very good book there for you is The Craft of Scientific Presentations by Michael Alley. I've also recently interviewed him for our podcast, the Ideas on Stage podcast. Michael Alley, The Craft of Scientific Presentations, recommended book.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to go for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. So we can come to all the questions, but thank you so much for submitting them. So Gwen has asked, do you have any advice for engaging the audience when you are recording the lectures and it's not live at all?
Yeah, it's much harder, as we said before, but the best thing we can do in that kind of environment is to then invite the audience. Say, for example, we were talking about you have a lecture which is split into several videos. It could be a 5-minute video here, a 5-minute video here, a 20-minute video. Then instead of just having video pre-recorded, then after each video, let's invite the audience to do something. So the interaction perhaps doesn't happen during the video because it's pre-recorded and it can't happen by definition. But interaction, in a way, engagement can happen in between sessions. So I give you a quick video pre-recorded. I invite you to work on an exercise, an assignment, something that's connected to the content of the video. And that's when the engagement happens, and then they watch another video.
Because so Gwen has said that she asks them to pause and then reflect on the last slide, and I think that's it's a good way to do it.
I like it. At the moment, I'm following a course like this, which also includes pre-recorded videos. It's not the only thing, and that's what the presenter does from time to time. Now, pause the video, ask a question, think about it, or maybe they invite us to do something again to work on within the same video. So a great approach. Yeah.
So I'd like to share what we do with our courses. So when we're making courses like this, is we work out if you've got, say you've got one subject, one particular subject, for example, like induction of anesthesia. That's my examples of anesthesia because it's my thing, but like induction of anesthesia, you could just do one long lecture that's an hour long. But if you break that up into, say, 5 shorter 5-minute segments, what you can do is you could actually put in assessments halfway through or after the first 2 videos are in sections. They can, they get those questions. They're asked to pick up on certain things you've said, and you can reinforce your key messages and your key learning outcomes. And that's quite a good way of getting engagement. But also, like we said, one of the big things is it's hard to assess how well they do. So that's one thing that you potentially, you can do with that. You can do it with SCORM files if you can't use individual lessons, so you can assess their engagement with those. That works quite well. So I think that pretty much brings us to a close. So before we finish up, I would just like to say thank you so much for coming along. If you found tonight informative and you found what we've talked about interesting, please don't just think it was a lovely thing to come along to and that was something I found useful, but think if you would like to have some help to implement these concepts or to make your teaching in your organization more engaging and more effective, please drop call in the chat, just the word call, and we'll be happy to reach out and have a discussion. Thank you so much for watching. Andrea, thank you very much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure having you and spending time with you to make this presentation. And thank you so much for watching. Good night.